All right, so I'm going to tell you today, I'm going to give you a quick caveat. All right, so today, it's kind of a fun day. If you're new to our church, if you've been coming for like maybe less than a month or a couple of times, or if it's your first time, I'm going to say this. Today's going to feel like you walked into sort of like a fun kind of like family meeting around the dinner table. And so what we're going to do for the next few minutes is I'm going to walk you through a couple of things that is kind of new to our church. And I want to start us with like a principle to kind of move from. And then from that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a passage of scripture. And then I'm going to give you sort of a big announcement, a couple of things that are going on with our church. And I love the way that I frame that because now for the next few minutes, everybody's going to feel a little clinchy. So that's great. All right. So the principle we're going to start with, right, is this, right? Life change typically happens or always happens downstream from obedience or for obedience, right? So ultimately for us, right, when it comes to our lives, usually there's some form of discomfort that leads us to some form of deciding what we're going to do next. And from that point, what happens next is for most of us, we get to decide whether we're going to obey what we know to be right or what God's calling us to do, or we're going to choose to sort of take things in our own hands and move forward. And so today, what's fascinating, and this is true for us individually, this is true for, I think this is true for companies, organizations, certainly true for churches, it's true for families. This principle is true for us, that at some point along the way, God has given you, in a lot of ways, control over whether you choose to obey or whether you choose to move forward. And what's fascinating about this is I go like, if I was God, because I think about that way too much, if I was God, I don't know that I would just give control over in some of these sort of areas. I would want to like do that, you know? But God has given us, I believe, decisions and choices to decide whether we're going to obey or not. And so for us as a church, this was like foundational for us from the beginning. And I don't know that it would have been such a high value if we hadn't have been a church that launched during COVID. So some of you know a little bit about our story, but my wife and I, we were in Traverse City, Michigan. By the way, anybody been to Traverse City? Have you guys been up there? Yeah. Everybody that shut down this week with the snow, I kind of laugh. I was like, this is just a random Wednesday in Traverse City. You know what I mean? Like, and we had a car the size of that speaker, so we had to get rid of that. And but we were in Traverse City, and before that, we were in Atlanta, Georgia. And we've always had a passion in our heart to create a church for people who aren't followers of Jesus, who are disconnected from faith. And we're in Traverse City. A lot of people don't know this, but Traverse City is one of the most de-churched areas in the country. In fact, it's right next to Boston on the national list, which is fun because most people don't know about Traverse City. Everybody knows Boston, but that's just sort of like the culture that it was in. And so when we were there, we were part of creating a church for people in that city who were de-churched, walked away from church. I'll say this a lot, like they felt like they outsmarted their faith, or they had childlike faith in some ways, but they outgrew it, and they moved in that direction, and then they go, hey, it just doesn't feel like an adult should, or even they'll say this, like our smart person can believe these things. And I always sort of laugh at that because I go like, some of the smartest people ever were followers of Jesus. Some of the best scientists, the best doctors, some of the most brilliant people in the world were followers of Jesus. And my question was always like, well, why did they believe what they believed, right? And so we started doing that. We were there for about 5 years, and we knew that we always wanted to start a church. So this has been on our mind since we were in college. So I kind of laugh, like some people in college, you had a lot of fun. I did too. I went to a Christian college, so we played root beer pong because that's how we roll. That's how you do it in a Christian dorm. We actually built a table. We emptied what I made that week, which is about $100 a week. We built a table. Yeah, this is not part of the story, but anyway. I met my wife in a library, and we began to dream about what it would be like, really from the get-go, to start a church like our church. And it was birthed there. And then me and some of my roommates from all over the country, we all went to different sort of areas of the country, and we got to be a part of amazing churches. It was really cool. And so we got to see a lot of great things. And what we were passionate about, how would I say this well? It like gripped our hearts even more the further that we went, right? It didn't get less, it only became more passionate. And so by the time we got to Traverse City, some of you have heard me say this before, it was at Easter. Everything was going great. We lived in a beautiful house. We had real health insurance. Some of y'all know what that is. Great. Like it was like, if you know, you know. Anyway, so like we had like benefits, we had all stuff, and we were like, you know, everything was going so well. We were at the peak, kind of where we were at. The church had grown. We'd done like a church merger thing too, and it kind of got to this really great place. And I walked away that Easter Sunday in the most tangible way possible. I have a lot of these moments. It felt like God was like, hey, it's time to plant a church. And I said, that's a great suggestion. Because I think I was like 32 at the time maybe. And we had planned on doing it, you know, when we were further along. And God was just so clear about he wanted us to do that. that then. And so we wanted to obey. And so this was the conversation we started having. It was right around Easter that year, where we just started saying, what does it look like to obey? And one of the passages that I really felt like I kept coming back to centered around a guy named Peter. And Peter, if you're unfamiliar with, especially the New Testament, Peter is fascinating to me. Peter was like an average guy, very, very average in a lot of ways. And what he did was he's like an ordinary fisherman. So his context of this was like his sort of family trade was being like an ordinary fisherman. He came from a small town in this area of the world. He likely, I don't know how to say this well, but he likely had a view that would have been fairly narrow to the area that he lived in, right? And what was so fascinating about this is when we find Peter in the moment that he meets Jesus, he's sort of tired, he's uber practical, but he was an experienced fisherman, right? So what you're gonna get in this sort of story, in the context, is that person, right? Tired, sort of very practical, experienced fisherman. And what Jesus is doing is he's teaching by this lake. And so Jesus, at this point in his life, was starting to attract a crowd. So Jesus was literally a rabbi, so he was a teacher. And people would come and they would follow him and they would just be a part. And he would start teaching, people would show up. I always think it's fascinating. I like to use a microphone. I don't know how he pulled this off. So all these people were around and the crowd began to swell. Right? It just began to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you almost get the feel from the text that it's almost like pushing Jesus towards the water because the crowd keeps getting bigger. And behind Jesus, and this is where we're going to pick up in the story, are these two boats. And they're owned by these fishermen, specifically these two brothers, right? And so we're going to pick up Luke chapter 5. Luke is fascinating. The details that we get from Luke are interesting because he was a doctor, and you get really beautiful details around this, right? So here's what happens. This is Luke chapter 5. So he, at the water's edge, being Jesus, at the water's edge, two boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon. Now, Simon is Peter, and we'll talk about that later, but anytime we say Simon, we're talking about Peter. Belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. So what he says is like, here's this boat, here's what I'd love for you to do. He sort of turns to Simon, he goes, I want you to like move that boat further out, because if you'll move that boat further out, he's gonna teach from the boat, right? So as best you can visualize this, I think it's almost funny, especially if you've ever been in a boat trying to stand up and teach. I just think it's hilarious. Jesus is on a boat teaching this, and he's sort of asking Peter to do something that I think is fascinating. He's disrupting what Peter is doing. Right? So Peter had been out and they tried to catch and nothing came of it, right? So they're on the shore sort of getting ready. The boats are just kind of there. Peter's like, I want to commandeer your boat. Which again, I wish I could paint this so clearly, which is fascinating that all of these people showed up for this rabbi that Peter had very little context for until this moment. And he's like, I need to give you a disruption and I'm going to commandeer your boat. So Peter has no idea, I don't think, of the significance of this moment. It goes on. Here's what it says in verse 4. So when Jesus had finished speaking, he says to Simon Peter, he said, put out into deep water and then let the nets down for a catch. Now, this is the part that I think when people teach this, they miss this. How many of you, now be really honest, when someone tells you to do how to do your job, you get low-key mad? Anybody in here? Can we all raise your hand? Yeah. And then keep your hands up for a second because I want to ask you one more question. Yeah. And then how many of you are still mad even if they're right? Go ahead. Anybody? Me too. Yeah, I think it's always so fun. Somebody will like, I just have a suggestion. I was like, oh, thanks. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of that. And so I love this. Again, rabbi, teacher comes up to him and says, look, I know you're sort of doing your thing. Here's how here's how you should do it, you know? And he gives an irrational request to Peter, being the professional fisherman, right? This is the wrong time to go out and fish. This is the wrong conditions to do it. It's a little bit embarrassing to do, right? You ever done this before? Like, other people would have been around. There's another boat. Like, other people were around. You're like, I want you to go back out there and fish. Nobody else is doing that. Everybody's kind of looking around going, why are you going now? You're a professional. Why would you do it this way, right? It made no sense to Peter. And Peter's response, I think, is so beautiful and fascinating. Here's what he says. He says, Simon Peter answered, Master, we worked hard all night and we haven't caught anything. Just like a gentle challenge to go, you don't know what you're talking about. Keep teaching, teacher. You know what I mean? You do you. You're doing a great job at that. That was so good. I saw you surfing on the boat. That's so good, man. Keep doing that. Don't tell me how to fish, you know? But then he says this. He says, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. And that phrase in the season of our lives, I think, was so fascinating to me, at least. Because Peter at the onset, we don't even know exactly why. Peter at the onset goes, look, I'm not doing this because it makes sense. I'm not doing this because I feel like I even should. I'm not doing this because it all sort of fits together. I'm not doing that because the reality of it is that this is the terrible idea. It's probably a little bit embarrassing to me. Probably doesn't make a ton of sense. This doesn't feel right. But even though that's the case, I'm going to still choose to obey. I'm going to still choose to obey. Now, I'm going to bring it back to our story a little bit. I'm going to interview it a little bit. So we decided in April that we were going to plant a church. We have 5 cities that we've been looking at. It's like New York, LA, Chicago was on the list, and Indianapolis was on the list, and Columbus was last on the list. So we had lived in Ohio for a little bit. We lived in the Dover area. No judgment. I'm a big Der Dutchman fan as well. So, that's the only place that it was that or Bob Evans. That's where we went. And we worked there for a little while, but I don't know how to say this well. At the time when we looked at New York, and then we looked at Columbus, it just felt different. They just felt like different places. And we went and visited. Felt different, yeah. Some are like, can I say the D Yankees in church? Is that what I was good? Yeah, I'm from the South. All right. So I was different. And so we visited these other cities, and some of you heard this before too, but we spent time in all these other cities. And we actually had relationships with people in the other cities. And not only that, but we actually had people that were going to help fund us in the other cities and baked in people that were interested in being a part of it. So in my head, I was like, in 4 out of the 5 cities, we walk in sort of not by ourselves, right? I know, right? It's kind of cool. Yeah. That's how it felt, Yeah. And so we walk in, not by ourselves. Now, here's what's so fascinating too. When we did it, we started to visit all these cities. And so we decided we were going to visit Columbus, and we had a trip planned for Indianapolis for 3 or 4 days. And then we had a trip for Columbus that was like an afternoon. It was kind of fun. That was kind of the plan. We were going to spend an afternoon in Columbus. And so we went to Indianapolis and went to all these cities, and we never felt like a piece at any one of them. And then we got on the outskirts of Dublin. In fact, I could tell you exactly where we are. We're pulling in, and it was before Bridge Park. It was before you get to some of those things. And in the most tangible way possible. And I'm not prescribing this to you. I'm just saying this for us. I was in the car with Emily. We had Henry in the back. Eleanor would have been a baby, right? Trying to do math in my head. Yeah. I can tell you the street we were on here in Dublin, where it was like, this is where I'm calling you to go. And then when we were in Indianapolis, it was kind of funny. In the exact same way, it was like, I can tell you the exact street was like, this is not where we're supposed to go. And so we get here, and I tell this story. It sounds humorous, but it's wildly true. We get there, I feel this, and we've been praying that God would speak to both of us. And I hear Emily, and I don't. You ever hear the crying sound? You ever heard that before? Yeah. She doesn't do that very often. That's not a thing that she does. And then I'm just driving, and I hear the sound, and in my head I said, oh crap, it's Ohio. I did this. That was kind of against the world. I don't know. That's how I felt. We're going. I didn't even know you put the in front of Ohio State. It was kind of fun. So anyway, Woody Harrelson, whoever is the coach. Anyway, that was a joke. Don't at me. Anyway, so I was doing that, and so we're driving. We feel this, and we get on the outskirts, and it was like, this is where I've called you to go. And so we ended up spending a day or two here. And then we were driving back to Traverse City, which I think is roughly a 5 or 6 hour trip. And so we start driving back to Traverse City, and we get almost all the way back. And we get there, and I'm a very how do you say this? What's the nice way to say it about myself? I want to be sure. Anybody else? I want to be certain. And so we get an hour away. And if an hour away from Traverse City is you're in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean? You're just kind of on a 2-lane sort of highway with deer everywhere, and just God, don't let them run out here. And I look at her, I was like, I feel like we need to go back to Indianapolis and just make sure. And she goes, okay. And the kids in the back, and we turned around and drove all the way back to Indianapolis that night. And I'm telling you what, when we got back, it was just the most affirming, this is not, you're going to Columbus. And so we got a hotel, we spent the night there, and we came back. And when I got back, the question that just kept sort of ringing in my head was, will we obey? Not because we didn't like Columbus, because we actually loved it when we visited, but will you obey and go wherever I tell you to go? And this is the harder part for me, that would become harder. And will you do it whenever I tell you to do it? And this passage with Peter was always fascinating in the back of my head, right? But because you say so. This is what we do. Because we feel like that you said so. Now, this passage, again, is so fascinating because what happens next with Peter is this. It goes on and it says this. It says, when they had done so, they go out, they do what Jesus said. They caught such a large number of fish that their nets begin to break. Which is funny. This is what you hope for until it happens. And then when it happens, you're like, I don't know if this is a good thing. Jesus sent us out here for too many fish, you know? So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and they filled both boats. They filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Now, again, I've not been on the water when something is sinking. I just feel like that's a negative experience. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it just doesn't feel like that was fun. And what Peter says next, again, I think this passage this gets overlooked so quickly. What Peter responds to Jesus with is brokenness in this moment. When Simon Peter saw this, goes on, he fell at Jesus' knees and he says, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man," which I just love that. I didn't catch any fish on my own. And then I went and I did what you said and I caught too many fish. And I'm coming back and I go, I need you to leave because what you have is different from me. And it exposed the depths of who Peter was in light of Jesus. So then it goes on and says this in verse 9. For he and all of his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. And so in this moment, Peter's response is fear, which I love. Like the initial response to the blessing that God had given him is a deeply rooted fear. And Jesus' response to him, I think, is so powerful. It goes on and it says this. So then Jesus says to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. That this man who had likely a small view of the area that he was in, who was a fisherman, and this is what he was going to do with his life, who was a professional, was trusted, doing those things. Jesus calls him out of those things and says, no, you're not going to do this anymore. Come follow me. And then you're going to do this. And the next verse, can I just say this? The next verse is in Western Christianity, one that we just sort of take out of the Bible. It's very hard for us to embody. It's very hard for us to live this way. And it's exactly what Jesus' early followers did. So when Jesus says to him, you're going to be a fisher of men, he goes on, he says, so they pulled their boats up on the shore and they left everything and they followed him. They followed him to wherever you go. God, wherever you send me, I'll go. And this is the reason why. The reason why he did is simply because you say so. Because you say so. So wherever you send, I'm going to go. Whatever you call me to do, I'm going to go. Whatever you lead me towards, I'm going to do that thing. Wherever you call me to do, with the time frame, all those things, that's what we're going to do. I put in my notes to say this way, that before obedience is a decision, or is not a decision, it's a posture, right? For obedience, it is a posture to come to God and say, I'm going to submit to you. And I put in my notes, I said this way, that long before, if we can go to the next one. Long before God changes where you are, he works on who you trust, right? So I'm going to tell you this. What's fascinating about this story for me is we came back to this over and over and over again. We took April around Easter, said we're going to plant a church. We decided to do it at that time without anybody coming with us, which is kind of a wild thing to do. We actually moved out of the house that we were in. We were in this 100-year-old house. Now, I'll be honest, once we left there, I was a little bit happy because the water didn't always work, and I crawled into the thing and tried to pull, that's a whole different thing. I'm not the person who likes spiders, so crawling under a 100-year-old house to pull to make your water work wasn't fun. We also had propane heat. I don't know if you guys have ever done that. But that was more expensive than the house in Traverse City. It was kind of fun. So we moved out of this, and if you can visualize this with both of our kids, we moved out of this house into a cottage near a lake that was around 500 to 600 square feet, and it was a 3-bedroom. So again, if you can picture this, in terms of square footage, that's where we were, and we moved out of that, and when we did, I don't think I've ever shared this before. You probably don't care, but it's kind of fun for me. They had twin beds right? And so I slept with Henry in one twin bed, and in another room, Emily slept with Eleanor in another twin bed, and then we wait for them to fall asleep, and then we'd move one of them over there, and we bought a Super Nintendo. Do you remember, you guys know? And Emily would play Super Nintendo at night, and in 7 years into marriage, I didn't know that she was a boss, and she beat the game. I walk in the dark, and she beat Mario, and I went, I'm in love with you. That was kind of fun, and so that's what we did. And we thought we'd be there a couple of months. We were there for, I don't know, like closer to 9 months in this cottage. Because most of you know, COVID hit. And so we resigned our jobs in November of 2019. And then a handful of people decided they were going to come with us. A couple of them are here today. Where's Jake and Krista? I think Jake's running the lights, yeah. Was that you that did the lights earlier? Just to that was fun. It's like, I came with you. Boom. It was fun. A fun part of their story, some of you have heard this before, but they decided to come after visiting one time. They didn't have a place to live, and they had one car. And they decided to come before they had jobs. And then in the midst of deciding to come, they visited. They're like, how's this going to work? Somebody gave them a car, and they both got better jobs than they had in Michigan, and they showed up. And I don't know how to say this well, but for a couple of 20-year-olds that are newly married to experience God's provision in that way, it was kind of powerful. And so at this point of the story, we were like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to start it. We had a couple of my roommates from college that helped us get started. They were phenomenal leaders. And so we showed up. And one of the critical moments in the journey for us, and it comes for obedience, is when COVID hit, I don't know how to say this well. We had resigned our jobs and just hired the person that was going to replace me. So we had just sort of burned the ships behind. There was no really going back. And I looked forward going, and it doesn't feel like we're going, you know what I mean? Like, how are we going to do this? And late one night, I was sitting on the bed, and Emily, who's infinitely wiser than I am, said, hey, she said, if God called us to do this, I believe he's called us to do this now, and it's his job to provide, and it's your job to just calm the heck down a little bit. And she didn't say that part. She didn't say that. But that's what was true. And I was like, that's so true. Like, we saw the best. She goes, it's his job to provide. And I'll tell you one of the most beautiful parts about our church plant journey so far is that has rung true over and over and over again. Every time that we've chosen to obey what God is doing, God has shown up. And some of you in the room, you've seen it in real time. Like I just saw Melissa. Melissa was here when we grew from about 40, 50 people online to about 6 in person when we went live, and she was one of the 6. And she's been here since that. I talk about Grant all the time. Grant was an agnostic atheist, dabbling in both. I don't know, yeah. yeah. They would join us online on Zoom and be a part of this. Comes to faith. Mary's incredible. Bethany's amazing, and just had her first baby, and we get to baptize. All these. So there were people there from the very beginning, and then what happened is all of our plans for a church plant, we literally threw out the window. We just said none of it would work because nobody's meeting in person. And we kept coming back to this idea, we're just going to continue to obey and trust and follow over and over again. So the last thing I'm going to share, and I'm going to be really vulnerable for a second, so I don't even know if we're going to say this online, it's kind of fun. About a year and a half ago, some of you know this, a little bit of the story. It was in the summer, but Emily had sort of like a mass, and they weren't sure what's going on. It was in the middle of summer, and and it was at a point in our church where things were going really, really well, but we looked around, and I went, I don't know exactly how to navigate all this. We had just I think we had just come out of like moving here. Yeah, we had just come out of moving here. So we had just the ceiling collapsed in La Scala, some of you guys remember that. We moved here in a couple of weeks, and then this began to happen. And there was there's several weeks in there where we were just like, what is it? What are we going to do? Surgery, all this kind of stuff going on. She was amazing through all of this. I was in the corner, just like, no, I'm good. I'm great. It's fine. I was doing. And I looked around, and this is one of the most sort of honest things I can tell you. In the most real way possible, of all of the things that we had sort of done in our church plant, the most honest thing is during that summer, I went, God, you're going to have to show up not just for our church, but for our family in ways that you've never shown up before. And I'll tell you this, as we walked that season, personally for me, God pulled me into a place of a kind of submission that I'd never been in before. And when it came to our church, when it came to our family, when it came to her, we again sat down at the dinner table. And again, with all of the wisdom that she has, looked at me and goes, God has called us to do this. He's called us to do this in this way. He's called us for this time in extraordinary ways. And we said together, like, we're going to continue over and over and over again to obey where you lead us. And the hard part about that, if I can just be really transparent, is every part of that, God closes doors and then typically leaves one open for us to walk through and says, this is where you go. And every time that we've done that, he leaves one door open and he says, this is where you're to go. And he guides us and he provides an extraordinary way. And so I tell you all that today because we, about 4.5, 5 months ago, somewhere in that range, we had come out of, we came out of La Scala, we came here, and it's been an extraordinary thing. In fact, you're going to see one of the janitorial staff here in a little bit. I don't think I could brag on Kaufman High School anymore. However you do like 1 out of 10, it would be like 17. Like their team is phenomenal. The district has been phenomenal. But every once in a while, when a school was built in like the 70s, you have to renovate it. And I didn't know that. I just thought, you just leave it. It's fine, right? And we got a call, again, to brag on them about 4.5 months ago. They're like, hey, here's what's going on. We're going to renovate Kaufman. We're going to start in May. And it'll probably be through the summer, so you're going to have to find a place to go in the midst of that. I was like, that's great. We can figure it out for a couple months. And again, I don't know, just to brag on them. And then the guys at Kaufman called me and goes, hey, just to tell you straight up, it's really, really great. And also, every time they say it's going to be that long, it's usually about 3 times that long. And I was like, well, that's a different thing. And then the district calls me again, which was really great. And they said, hey, just to give you a heads up, it's likely going to go through like November because that's when they have to be done. And that's when they'll do choral, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a long time to not know where to go. Now, another thing about me that's always fun, and it's probably the church planner in me, the entrepreneurial side, I am very driven. And so we decided anytime there's a moment like this is an opportunity for us to figure out what's next. And so we looked at I figured out this morning just to make sure I was accurate, 31 different places that we looked at to go next. And all of them were a no. All of them. Now, there were a couple that we could go into. So we could maybe go into a middle school, but we would be putting up all the chairs and all the staging, and then the kids would meet in a small classroom, and that would just be harder for us to navigate. To be really honest, some of you will ask, like, hey, are you ever going to buy a building? And I was like, I would love to buy a building. That would be great. And we look all the time. There was one that we were very interested in seeing if we could purchase, but it's in an area of Dublin that they are very unlikely to rezone, especially in this season. So there was the one property that was currently like for sale that we thought we could maybe go after, but it just didn't work. And then we looked at lease spaces, and what was difficult about some of the lease spaces that we looked at is that we had a time frame that's pretty tight to do it, and then we sort of run into zoning things, or you're in a place where nobody can find you, and that's just a different thing to do. And so we're like, God, what do you have for us? And so this is between us. Can I tell you just between us what happened next? And then we won't put this online because I'll edit this out. So there was a place that we went to, and we looked at it when we first came. And it was always kind of on our list, but we're like, I don't know if we could do it. And they had closed for this part of the season. I didn't realize it at the time. They had closed this part of the season. And I called, and I got a voicemail. And I called 27, I think it was around 27 times in about a week and a half. Yeah, that's how I got Emily to marry me. Anyway, so that was kind of fun. And she finally picked up. Anyway, and so it finally got it. And then at one point, just between us, I actually worked on filling out it was like a wedding venue. I filled out a form almost pretending like I was a bride to see if I could get them to respond that way. Patricia. Anyway, so it was great. And then out of nowhere, one day, they called us back. They said, hey, we'd be open to talking to you. That's great. Come visit. So we went to visit. And when we went to visit it, me and Emily went. We didn't even tell anybody we were going at the time. And we showed up, and we're like, hey, let's look at it. And the people that are running it were followers of Jesus. And they go, oh, this is so exciting. Your church? We haven't had a church here in a long time. Well, that's so great. I was like, you're gonna do Sundays? I was like, yes, that would be the goal. That'd be great. I'd love to do Sundays. And it's so great. And it's actually available during the time. And not only is it available, and again, this is cool how God works. It's not been like this for a long time. It is fully available on Sundays and the times that you need it for the rest of the year. and beyond, which is kind of cool. And then we walked around, and again, I'm wired to just ask, right? Part of the reason we met in hotels is because I asked the hotels. They're like, hey, it's like $3,000 rent. I was like, how about 300? And they're like, okay, that's great. And so we did that. So I was like, well, what if we could install some of our gear? Would you be up for that? Like, oh, yeah. And then there was a room, and they would use it for storage, and it's a very, 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 very large room. I was like, well, could we just store all of our kids' gear here? And they're like, yes. And I was like, praise God, what else can I ask for? You got $1 million. Anyway, so, no, I'm just kidding. And I was like, can we do this? And so we just kept asking. We just kept asking. And they kept saying yes. And they kept saying yes. Some of this is because they're like, we really want you to be here. And so over and over again, we did. Now, again, this is not you, this is me. The part for me is going like, well, is it too far away? Like, that was always a question. Now, again, we lived in Atlanta, so I would drive 40 minutes to work every day. It wasn't like too far away from me, but I was like, is it too far away? And so I looked on a map, and then I plugged it in. And again, this might sound creepy, but if you fill out a Connect card, anyway, so we got your addresses. And I plugged in the addresses of the people that were the extremities of this. Like, how much further away is it? And it's 4.5 minutes. Now, again, because of 270, from everybody in like Hilliard and south of Hilliard, and if you live in Bellefontaine, just kidding, it's about 4.5 minutes. I got you. Anyway, it's like 4.5 minutes further for those people. Like, everybody, it ended up being like 4.5 minutes further away. And I was like, well, here, how do I sell this? I was like, just pick your favorite Hillary Duff song. Just kidding. Pick and listen to it one more time. You'll be there. You know what I mean? I was like, that's not that big of a deal. And so we looked at that. And then the area that's in, it's up Sawmill Parkway. Right, it's up Sawmill Parkway. And I was like, well, the benefit of that is there's a Starbucks across the street. So for nothing else, if we're going to be as Western as we possibly can, get your caffeine before the sermon. It's great. So you get to do that. And it's across from Target. The place we're going to is a place called Bridgewater Conference Center, right? Yeah, some of you are like, I had prom there, but we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about that. Like, leave that out. You know what I mean? Just kidding. Yeah, so the way that God provided for our church, which I'm super excited about, is he found us a place that's about 4.5 minutes for most of us, especially in the extremities. Now, if you live next door to here, it's further, right? But I get that. But like, if coming from the extremities, it's about 4.5 minutes. Provided a place that we can be semi-permanent in, right? So again, this has been a prayer that we've had, and if you're a volunteer in pre-K especially, we want to separate our pre-K space, right? Because it's better for the kid to do that. And so here's what we found, is when we found the kid space, it's a wide open place, and then they have the storage room that we can use for the large group, but now we can have space for 3 different, like babies, young pre-K, and older pre-K, which is a game changer if you have, I know, all the pre-K volunteers are like, we're going now. Anyway, but the other point I want to say this, and this is one of the other things, and so the auditorium, and some of you, again, you come in here, you experience all this, it takes a lot of work, right? I don't know, I mean, I could call all the guys that do this, but there's so many that get here super early, they put all this together. And the big part is like, how do we get all of our lighting? And I asked, I was like, would you be okay if we just installed a bunch of lights in your really pretty ballroom? And they're like, absolutely. And they're gonna let us install all of our lighting, on the front lighting involved in this, all these kinds of things. And I heard this, can I just be really honest with you? And I heard all of these things, we did all of this stuff, it was right around Christmas. And to be fully vulnerable, the part that I struggled with is I went, yeah, but then we came in here. Some of you know this. How many of you are here at Christmas? You here at Christmas? Yeah. And some of you remember this. I get emotional about it. We prayed that God would allow us to fill this room before we left. And I was like, he's going to do it. And then we came in here at Christmas. You guys remember this? How many of you sat in the back? Anybody sit back there? Yeah. And we went all the way to the back wall. And I stood back there knowing all of this. And I said, I don't know if I want to go. This feels pretty great. You know what I mean? It's a good. And the question came up. And again, I know, will you obey and will you be obedient? And now I'm very excited about it. In a lot of ways, it's great in so many different ways. But I looked around and I was like, God answered a prayer. He provided exactly what we need. He's given to our church over and over and over again in abundant and beautiful ways. And now I think he's calling us to be part of it, right? So here's what I'm going to tell you. Sorry, we just slowly started rolling this out. Our plan is to go there Easter Sunday, right? Easter Sunday will be our first sort of big service there. We will get in there a few times before that to like set things up, all those kinds of things. But I need your help, right? So the full transparency, we need your help to do it, right? And I said this in our very first Zoom call. I will say this throughout the course of our church, right? There are moments for us that are like all-in moments, right? I would say there are moments for us that are all-in moments. Where if you call Nuvo your church, right, you can passively attend and be a part of it. But I need you to go all in with us and lock arms with us. I do. We need you to do that. First is this. I need you to step in to serve, right? Which means this, if you come to our church and you don't serve, I'm so glad you're here. Keep coming back. And also, I need you to make this church your church and to step in and to serve. I need you to serve on setup team, right? Like, you're like, dude, I don't get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. I get it. And I don't love getting up early either, especially when it's so cold I can't feel my legs and I forget the long john. Long john? Is that what the under? Yeah. Let's talk about underwear. That's fun. Anyway, so I get it. Can I just say I get it? And also, the men in the room especially, can I say something? Like, we get up and we do that for the people who aren't in the room yet. Okay, and that's what I did. And I need you to serve. I need you to serve in pre-K. Can I tell you why I need you to serve in pre-K? And this is like a ratio numbers thing. We are growing super fast in kids, which is amazing. In fact, today, there's so many kids back there. It's amazing. And we have a lot of volunteers. And you may not know this. And the way that they sacrifice is to serve back there sometimes 3 times a month. And they'll come once. And there are some volunteers that don't get to come but maybe once every other month because there's serving so much back there. And can I just tell you, I need you to serve back there so that we can provide the best experience for pre-K, and don't miss this, so that we can do 2 rooms. Why? Because it's better for the student if we do that. I need you to serve in Nouveau Youth, right? I don't know if you know this, that whole section was full. I went into the rock shop earlier, and I looked in Sarah's eyes, and she looked at me as to say, we've already packed it. I was like, heck yeah. And she goes, heck yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's great. But we need you to serve. We need you to be in these places, right? I need you to serve. And so if you attend our church and you're like, hey, it's time for you to step in. If you go, hey, it's even once a month, great, we need you to serve once a month. Whatever you can give in your time to be a part of setup team, production, kids, and everybody in kids says, why didn't you go first with that? My bad, I should have led with that. Anyway, kids, pre-K, I need you to step up. I need you to serve. If you're a person, can I say this? And you used to serve or you used to serve more and you stepped back, this is the time to stop or to step up and serve more. We need to do that. The other thing around this that I'll tell you is we need to get ready for the move, right? And we're going to create work days. Now, some of you use drills, which is so great. I'm so glad you do, because I do not. I don't do that. Emily does. I don't do that. Yeah. So here's what I'm saying. We're going to have a couple of work days. And can I say this? And somebody knows. I don't need you to be an expert. I need you to be willing to help us get it done, right? I'm going to brag on somebody. I'm probably going to embarrass her. I probably should have asked for it to this. When we went to La Scala, we had 40 days to change that whole building around. And I would come in, and I'd say this every once in a while, and there were so many people that, so many people that worked on this. There were probably 20, 30 people there every day working on it. But Debbie Garberick would sneak in, and I didn't even know she was there sometimes. So we had these work days. And I'd come into the back, and there was like this LED wall, but behind it was these, I get emotional, were these doors. And I'd come in, and she'd be sitting there on the floor painting the bottom of the door. Now, I'll tell you, if you went to La Scala, you know this. Those doors needed some Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? And she would be painting. And she wouldn't even, it wasn't like, look at me. It wasn't like, oh, she just come in and do it, and then she'd sneak out. She'd head out. And I go, look, there were things that I painted that she repainted because I was so bad at it. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is great. And I would just say this, like, we're going to have work days like this. To go semi-permanent in the way that we're going to do it, we need your help on those days too. We need you to lock in with that. Now, the other one that I'm going to tell you about, I'll say, if you're a person who's not a Christian, I'll say, like, you go, man, this might feel cringe. I'll say, I never feel cringe about talking about money. I'll just be honest with you, I don't, because it's between you and God. My job is to ask. This isn't ever like weird for me. I actually enjoy it. I really do. But to do what we're going to do, it's going to cost to do it well, right? Now, I'll tell you how this works, right? If we're going to step into the season with the excellence that God is calling us to step into, right, and the margin that we need to do it, there's a real cost to doing it well, to setting up our setup teams well, to doing all the things we need to do. The rough estimate that we've got right now is around $70,000 to do it really, really well. Right? It's about $70K to get in there. And they're like, wait a minute, aren't we already portable? That's a great thought. Here's the thing. All the signs that we have, some of them work, some of them don't. And those are not cheap signs, right? They're not cheap to do that. When it comes to setup team, we have the first opportunity that we've had in the history of our church to do setup in a way where we can do it even faster and even more sustainable and even better for every volunteer, right? But to do that well, it costs money to do that, right? When I look at this, I was like, how do I break this down in the most tangible way for you? Here's what it is, right? New signage that fits the building space so that the arrows point in the right direction. The worst thing you can do is say the restrooms are this way and they walk into a closet nursing moms and everybody feels bad. You know, we want to figure out how to do that well, right? We need new signage. Installing gear into Bridgewater. To install the front lighting, which saves us about 45 minutes of manpower time, right? We have to pay somebody, I don't know, when they hang stuff over your head, they're insured, which is great. They're not cheap. We have to pay somebody to come in there and do those sorts of things, right? The portable kids space upgrades, here's the thing. We're built for Kaufman. I don't know how to brag about this kids space anymore, but like we're gonna be able to build like hallways in it to create the space that we need. We need the equipment to do that. We need the people to do that. All right, we need that. Aesthetic designs. Now, again, this is an interesting one. We have, for the first time in at least 3 years, we have the opportunity to market to an area of the city that we haven't marketed to like this before, right? So here's what we did, because I'm a geek. We took Powell, Target, which is right across the street from that, and we're like, who all comes to this Target? You can find that, thank you, ChatGPT. So now we know who comes there all the time, right? And we need to pay to let those areas know that we're there. And then this allows us to stretch even further up, right? Into Worthington, Lewis Center, other places. We want to be able to market well because it's an interesting opportunity to be able to do that. And then the setup and tear down efficiencies, you heard me talk about that. So I'm going to tell you straight up, right? This is what we're praying for. This is what we need your help with, right? We need to get all those things by about February 28th, which is the last day in February. So over the next 4 weeks, our challenge to you is to not go, well, I'm going to give my tithe money to this, right? It's not that. It's to go, I'm going to go above and beyond sacrificially to do everything I can to make this space ready for us. And here's what I'll tell you. This is the honest truth. We're going to try to raise that in about a month because it takes time to get everything here, and we want to be able to purchase it. So we're going to ask you to help us get there. Now, can I tell you this? And then I'll say this when it comes to financial stuff. For those in the room who are followers of Jesus, you've heard us talk about financial resource before, all those kinds of things. Let me just say this. Most of the time, a number immediately came into your head, some version of that, and it made you uncomfortable, and this is what I do at least. I start negotiating that down. Here's what I'm going to challenge you to do if you're a Christian in the room. If you're not a Christian, I got something else for you. I want you to start asking, how do you negotiate that up in a faith way? God, what do you actually want to do through my resources on this project? I can tell you why. You're like, man, that feels salesy. It's actually not. It sounds really bad. How do I say this well? Can I say this well? We need you to be a part of it. God has always provided everything that we need. I don't fear that stuff. But what I find is when people give sacrificially and they step in faith kind of generosity, God does something in people. Now, it's usually, I don't think, that then God just gives you a ton of money back. Like, that's what I was taught growing up. Like, if I give this, God's going to 10x my money. I'm like, here's $10. I'll be waiting, you know? I don't know that it's that. Maybe sometimes it's that. I don't know. There's a freedom that comes to that kind of generosity. We're going to call you to it, right? Last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to invite Josh the band to come up. We're going to wrap up here in just a second. That's it. I was thinking about this a lot this past week, and we haven't talked about this in a while like this. But I was like, how do I get your brain to think so far beyond us? And the best way I know how to do that is talk about, how's this? Well, the people who aren't in the room yet. That somewhere right now, someone is not here yet, and they have no idea that we exist. They have no idea that we exist. It's like the 20-something person. Most of us know this person. This 20-something person who has like questions about purpose and life and how to figure it out. And in a culture, I think, like we live in right now, it has moved a lot of people away from Christianity because of politics and the word evangelical, all these sorts of things. And it's not even that they don't want to be true. They wish it was. It's just they're disconnected from it, right? We launched youth today. I couldn't help but think about this on the way in here. There's a middle school student who has anxiety or they're struggling. And they're like, I don't think all the answers reside outside the church. I think a lot of answers reside in the church when it comes to faith, right? Many of you know this. This is true of our church now. Like, there's a widow somewhere who is trying to figure out what's next for her and her family. And we get to be the place where they go and figure out what's next. Right? Yeah, I was. It says, I'll say two more, and then we're gonna pray. This is why we planted our church. There is someone who's agnostic or atheist. I get emotional talking about this, sorry. Who will try other churches, who will not let them ask questions, and will not let them disagree, and will not let them be a person who's agnostic or atheist and feel comfortable there. And they will go to those churches and they will be turned off by faith and they'll walk away from it. Nobody likes saying this out loud. I don't like to say this out loud a lot, but there are people sitting in churches right now who are drifting towards agnosticism because the church actually doesn't give a crap about that part of it, because it's like contained and this is how we do it, this is who we are. There's not that church for those people sometimes. And I'll tell you, I don't know how to, again, I've worked at some of the largest churches in the country. I've worked at big churches, I've worked at small churches. Our church will always be the church that says you can come and wildly disagree with me. You can come as a person who gets all the DC talk references, all that, as long as you're on mission, Or you can be the person who disagrees with us fully on everything and sit here and go, I'm curious about my faith. And we want you in proximity to people who are moving towards Jesus. And we want to paint the most irresistible picture of who Jesus actually is. And someone somewhere woke up this morning and will eventually come to faith in Jesus. Not because of me, not because of my messages. I mean, they're really great. It's not going to be because of them. It's because you showed up as the ecclesia, the collected group of people, the church, and said, you are welcome here too. Next week, we're going to baptize a guy, He's serving in kids right now, who is agnostic, and we did a night of worship. And he goes, I've never felt anything like this. And he gives his life to Christ outside. You're going to hear a story. I won't ruin it. And we get to baptize him next week, and he did that in a restaurant. Jesus showed up in a restaurant for him and brought him to faith. Oh, sorry. I hope that doesn't feel fake. It's very real to me. And we moved here for him. And if he was the only one, we would have done all that. Then I start crying. I can't stop. And Emily teases me. Henry's like, Dad, did you eat something? Anyway, sorry. Yeah, sorry. And I'm going to say this. This is why you are here. It is not to build a church just for you. It's to build a church for every person who adamantly disagrees with you. For every person who's a part of a community that's on an outlier, that doesn't feel safe in church. It's a part of it. You are building a church for everybody who's not here yet. And you can come and consume. And you can be a part of a place that goes, well, build church for me. Or you can go, God, what do you want me to do? And because you said so, I will obey. So here's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you to close your eyes for a second, bow your heads, mostly so I can just gain composure. I'm just kidding, no. And the band's gonna come, they're gonna come sing in a second. And it's funny, we had trust in God and then we had gratitude. And I was like, I want to do gratitude to close this out. And here's why. Because as a church, we're going to pre-thank God for what he's going to do in our church in this next season. And there's a point that it talks about like this sort of passionate gratitude towards him. If you're a follower of Jesus, I'm going to ask you to sing that as a prayer. I'm going to ask you to sing that as a prayer, believing that God is going to do more through us in this next season than he's done so far. That by the hundreds, people begin to turn towards him and experience him in ways that feel undeniable. I was praying over the students today. I was like, it's not just the intellectual, it is the fact that they can go and experience in an undeniable way the power and the presence of Jesus. That they will too. So here's my question. As you pray, God, what would you have me to do? And then if you're willing to pray the prayer, it's simply this. God, I will obey. So I'm going to ask you if you would. I'm going to ask you to stand up, if you would. And I'm going to pray for us. I'm going to ask if you just give us just a couple of minutes before you leave. We're going to sing this out as a prayer. and I'll come back up and dismiss us. Father, we thank you so much for every moment of provision that you've had for our church, for every time you've shown up in ways that we couldn't have imagined. We thank you for giving us computers and a camera to be able to film our first service. We thank you for the people that showed up to Zoom calls when it was almost a church, but not really a church yet. We thank you for the people at the Embassy Suites who said yes to $300 when that's all we had in the bank at the time, and opened the door for the next 4 locations that we would go to before we launched our church. And we thank you for the team, Cameron Mitchell, who opened Bridge Park to a church to be able to launch it. God, we thank you for everyone at La Scala who both allowed us and believed in us to go to a restaurant and turn it into a church. God, we thank you for the team at Kaufman who so willingly opened these doors for us to come and grow and become more and more of who you called us to be. God, we thank you for this next step. God, we thank you that we're going to go out in those waters and our nets are not only going to be full, but they're going to be breaking. And they're going to be breaking with people who are the someone, somewheres, returning back to you. God, I pray that everybody in this room today feels like put a mark in the sand to go, I'm going to do whatever it takes for the next step. And I pray that a year from now, as we look back, that we see person after person after person